February 1991. In the small Saudi Arabian border town of Khafji, American soldiers faced the unexpected, an Iraqi invasion.
The first thing that entered my mind was fear. If you say you're not afraid, you're either lying or you're insane.
The real story behind the Persian Gulf War is that of the individual soldier.
I was wondering at one point what size bullet was going to come through the wall all the way.
It is a story of honor, determination, and valor.
Having been in the Battle of Khafji, I appreciate life. Very, very much. Life is precious.
It is a story forever written in the hearts of those who lived it. A story told by those who were there.
You know, this business of warfare, it's a nasty, brutal, deadly business, but they weren't going to win.
The Persian Gulf War. $550,000 American troops have amassed in Saudi Arabia. They are ready to face dictator Saddam Hussein and his notorious army now occupying Kuwait.
This guy was no genius at war. He stopped on that border and waited and decided that somehow he was going to get away with this. And then he sat and waited month after month while we built up. And this thing proceeded like a Viennese waltz or something, very slowly and stately.
Now, the 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force. We will not fail. As I report to you, air attacks are underway against military targets in Iraq.
The nightly airstrikes pound Iraqi positions throughout the region. Despite the initial success of the air war, the battle comes to the soldiers on the ground.
The Persian Gulf War was sort of presented as this bloodless, high-tech, almost a video game war. And wars are never that. Wars are about soldiers, they're about sacrifice, they're about fear.
Along the border between Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, forward observers call in these airstrikes from observation posts, called OPs, that are positioned across the desert. Marine Kurt Lang is posted at OP-8, monitoring the road that leads to the Saudi Arabian town of Khafji. Under the cover of darkness, he calls in an air raid on Iraqi forces advancing toward the border.
Following the raid, we got a radio call. I was asked to come back to Shrig headquarters there at the northern end of Khafji for a debriefing. We had offset a massive offense into Khafji. So we got a lot of kudos, a lot of high fives, a lot of applause. And the word that was passed to us was, hey, you know, there's no way that they can mount another attack that size. So, you know, look forward to a pretty peaceful evening. I drove back to the observation post and was immediately met by my team chief, Sergeant Lozano. Sergeant Lozano was all excited. In my absence, there were 3 Iraqis that had walked in the sand without varying their path directly up to our position, waving white flags. They each presented a little leaflet that had been part of the psychological campaign that was dropped behind saying, hey, with this leaflet, "Surrender, we'll treat you nice." Sergeant Lozano and the other team members, when they took them into custody and they searched them, came up with maps. And on the map, our position there, our observation post, was plotted as a target. Obviously, they knew exactly where we were.
6 kilometers away at OP-7, Doug Kleinsmith and his team aid reconnaissance Marines and Army Special Forces. Like Kurt at OP-8, they sit less than 2 kilometers away from Iraqi artillery. Artillery aimed directly at their position.
Well, I had artillery sitting in front of me, so when the air came up that evening, I got it. We brought it in over top and we nailed them. We were watching it through the thermal sights, and you could see the little guys running around and then just kind of stop, and then the color on the thermal sight that would change from bright yellow to orange to red to purple to, that was their body temperature changing. So, we hit them, we got them good. And then we thought, hey, all right, good night. Got one, and let's set up a watch and see what happens tomorrow. The next thing I know is Corporal Calhoun comes down and wakes me up. He goes, "Sir, you got to get up here. It's bad. There's stuff going on." I had not seen a concern like that on his face before. And I go, "All right, coming up." And as soon as I walked out on the roof, across the horizon, you could just hear like 100 tanks had just started up. And it was loud, and it was a lot of them.
There is a distinct sound that even 2.5 kilometers away, over a desert environment without trees, distinct sound of the metallic squeaking and creaking of armored vehicles. If you've been around them, you know. Started out as one, and then two, and then many. Unbeknownst to me, this activity was happening all along the Allied lines, all the way up to the elbow of Kuwait.
Bravo 1-1. Headcom 4-1 pumped on guard. Come up Red 4.
On a routine mission high above western Kuwait, pilot Mike Edwards suddenly becomes part of an effort to stop the Iraqi surprise attack.
Roger, say it all again. Base -4. Something's burning. Big time. I don't know what it is. What's the matter, Griffin?
There's just kind of a different buzz in the radio, a different feel, or you sense it in the voices of the people you're talking to, that there's something going on.
We got some big shooting going on down there. They're shooting to us as good guys.
As we start to cruise that direction, we're talking to different people, picking up more bits of information.
Ghost 02, Blacklist, check fire, contact Blacklist, call 5 for Ghost 02, check fire.
And eventually Blacklist hands us off to an OV-10 forward air controller.
All right, what was Ryder, and what exactly do you have for us?
So we're listening to this story kind of unravel as to where the good guys are, where the bad guys are, what targets the forward air controller wants hit.
BTR's entering Khafji. Can you go to that area and check out the site, over? So you can see them shooting. They're shooting right at the end of town. Like I said, we can see the shooting down there.
But I'm getting really low on gas at this point, and I keep adjusting my bingo so we can at least get some weapons off and then head home. I tell the forward air controller I have everything in sight, brief my wingman that we're going to come in, shooter, Maverick, which means we'll both shoot a Maverick. And we go in, we take out a couple vehicles, and then immediately we head south because we're really pushing the gas.
Edwards is with the Fighting Falcons, the 355th Tactical Fighter Squadron. He flies an A-10 fighter jet.
The nice thing about the A-10 is we can sit there and employ against targets, time and time again, so we can be very effective and really help out the guys on the ground.
The A-10 is affectionately called the Warthog.
The Warthog is built to stay up there for a long time, carry a huge amount of weapons, It can take a lot of beating and a lot of shooting up and still fly back home when it's done. And it's a tank killer extraordinaire.
Not surprisingly, the A-10 also has a nickname among the Iraqis.
They used to call us, I guess, Silent Death. And because of the altitudes we were operating at and the type of engines we have, they couldn't hear us. So at that point, you're picking out targets and you're launching weapons against them, and they don't even know you're there. And next thing they know is things are blowing up around them. If you know that you're not going to hear the threat come to you, then you're always on edge. You know, and that has to wear on their mind and bodies.
Tonight, the Iraqis have an advantage. The scope of their surprise attack exceeds available air support. At OP-7 and OP-8, Doug Kleinsmith and Kurt Lang can't get the aircraft they need. They are nearly defenseless, carrying only radios and their personal weapons.
I mean, we were a couple dozen guys with small arms and some anti-tank weapons. We may have been able to hold off and hit a few of them, but we wouldn't be able to do much against a determined armored assault.
It was enough for the mission that we were sent out to do. It was not even a speed bump for the rest of that evening. I was asking for higher headquarters. You know, we're an observation post. We're not an offensive unit here. Let us relocate. Let us leave. You know, we're non-effective. And over the course of many radio transmissions, it was finally spelled out to me, no, you're going to remain until your position is untenable. You know, stay where you're out. And so I told my team to prepare for the worst. You know, we're here to stay.
Doug Kleinsmith is on the radio as Wild Eagle 3-2.
I got on the radio, and Kurt was on the radio, and he's describing what he's hearing, and I'm describing what he's hearing, and we're trying to find him.
Roger, this Wild Eagle. One's going to try and regroup and head back up if we can get the clearance down here. Roger, 7-5, Wild Eagle. Yeah, 7-5.
And they started shooting illumination rounds over top of our position, over top of Kurt's position.
Bravo, 1-1. Roger.
And I'm saying, Kurt, you seen this? He's, yeah. I'm also hearing a lot more in front of us. I said, yeah, I'm hearing stuff all over the place.
Be advised, every so often you're just coming in very weak, I can barely hear you.
And he said, they're in front of me, and they're coming at us. They're coming at us.
Be advised, the whole rest of our element is pulling back to the shop. Roger, big just copy.
And I looked over where he was, and he was about 8 kilometers away. But in the desert, that's, you know, we could see very clearly. It was very flat. And all of a sudden, his whole position was a fan of green tracers coming over top. I looked out there and I was like, oh, he's dead. Those guys are done.
The word came down that there had been this Iraqi attack on a small and insignificant border town on the Kuwait-Saudi border. The reaction of the military was somewhat astonished. You know, they just didn't believe that this had happened. It was kind of like someone had stuck a stick in an ant's nest. There were a lot of folks scurrying around trying to figure this thing out.
Doug Kleinsmith is caught in the fervor of the attack. He holds on to his observation post, now with the help of 4 Cobra gunships.
I know they saved us because they asked what I wanted them to do, and I kept them circling. I said, just, you know, press forward, let yourself be known. And as long as those guys are there, I know those guys weren't coming at us. There's no way they're going to approach us with 4 Cobras around us. I had pressed a few of the Cobras. I had sent them toward Kurt's last location.
Kurt Lang barely holds on as the Iraqi 5th Mechanized Division rolls over his position toward Khafji.
The man who was just materializing out of the sand dune in front of us was the gunner on top of a tank, and he swung his .50 caliber machine gun in our direction and just started letting out a string of fire. And I remember just hitting the ground, face down. I'm on my stomach now. I recall looking and seeing the bunker that we had put together with all these sandbags is just melting in front of my eyes with the impact of all the machine gun rounds. I'm laying there trying to low crawl back was my team chief, Sergeant Lozano. He's now right on top of the sand dune, just yelling, "Come on, sir, get down." He's yelling, "Crawl, crawl." Sergeant Lozano was just pumping these M203 smoke and illumination rounds at this gunner, and he got him to go back down into the tank, which gave me a chance to look crawling back to what was the bunker, and behind the bunker where the vehicle was.
Lang and his team have no choice, leaving behind personal belongings and sensitive cryptological equipment. They make an escape.
So Wild Eagle 3-2, also you have to let them know that all our gear, including radios with call signs and frequencies, were compromised.
We ran right into this T-55 tank that was in front of us, and so close that it couldn't depress its tube low enough to shoot us, but at the same time, if it continued its rate of speed, it would just crush us. It would roll right over us. The driver stomped on the gas, and we took off, and we were really just bouncing from one little sand dune to another. But we were expecting that final and fatal shot to happen at any time. And then there was a flash, a huge flash, and a fireball. Is it us that's getting blown up? And then we realized it was a tank. The tank had literally been destroyed. It had been blasted into flames.
A Cobra gunship sent by Kleinsmith makes it just in time. Launching a Hellfire missile, the Cobra is able to take out the Iraqi T-55.
Kurt came back up on the radio. "Doc, I thought you were dead." "Oh, Kurt, dude, man, I thought you were dead."
He's like, "Oh, my gosh. Are you okay? I thought you were dead. We saw your position go up like a Christmas tree." And after he finished, I'm like, "Hold on, sir. I thought you're dead. Where are you?" And finds out, he goes, "I'm still here at Observation Post 7. I'm telling him, "Sir, be advised. You're 5 to 7 kilometers behind enemy lines. They're in the city."
In a matter of hours, the Iraqis roll into the city of Khafji.
This is Brad Willis reporting from the front gates of the city of Khafji.
The Iraqi strikes last night caught allies by surprise.
We can hear light weapons firing and see the smoke.
With the Saudi border town in Iraqi hands, Saddam has already proclaimed a major victory.
Areas of Khafji still apparently burning. We have heard some loud explosions and sporadic small weapons fire. Clearly, there is still some resistance in Khafji.
There had been this Iraqi attack, which was mounted by a couple of very good units, probably as good as Saddam Hussein had. An armor column came roaring up the road. They burst into the town. By the time that they got there, it was pretty much a ghost town.
Not everyone gets out of Khafji. J.D. Brown and Kevin Callahan, known as Doc to his teammates, are members of a 6-man Marine reconnaissance team. They opt to stay, hidden on a rooftop in the city, isolated by the Iraqi advance.
Liberation of Khafji, take 1.
At the time, we had no idea what kind of scope this attack was.
It's a lovely moonlit evening in the Saudi here. We can't think of a better way we'd like to spend our time over.
We didn't have any idea whether it was just a raid or a spoiling attack, or if it was the entire Iraqi army coming across the border. It was kind of a surreal moment to see the enemy for the first time and realize that all of those troops that you see coming down the street are there to kill you.
They basically just flooded into Khafji en masse. You couldn't count them. There was just too many. I was thinking they don't know we're here and we're going to inflict some really heavy damage as long as they don't discover us. And that This is a recon Marine's dream, is to be able to not only report on the enemy, but call in fire on them.
To be effective, the recon team has to move to a building with a better vantage point, a building closer to the Iraqis.
Normally a recon team would not move in broad daylight, but we really had no choice. We snuck through the streets of Khafji in the back roads and made it to the other building, luckily, and got up on the roof. I think that was probably the most nerve-wracking time for me, was making that first move into the streets. And if we had been spotted as a small team, we didn't have a whole lot to fight back with.
It starts to mess with your mind a little bit because there's all these dark windows everywhere you look, and storm drains, and just, you know, any place where anybody can be hiding. It's just all over. In terrain like that, you have to keep your eyes out 360 degrees around you and spherical along all three axes, because attacks can come not only from left, right, front, and back, but they can come from above or below as well.
I got you covered. Room straight ahead. You guys can...
Combat forms the closest bonds between men. You are dependent for your life on the man on your left, the man on your right, the guy behind you. And you know that if you get in trouble, either one of these guys or the one behind you would lay down his life for yours.
Doc Callahan and J.D. Brown served together for only 9 months. After the war, they went their separate ways. Today, 12 years later, their bond remains strong.
I've been looking for you for 12 years, Jeff.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I've tried everything.
It's good to see you.
Glad to see you kept your Marine Corps haircut there.
It's a zero maintenance haircut.
I meant to bring my bush cover that still has that silver star on it that you gave me by the dumpster in the parking lot.
I remember that.
I'll never forget that as long as I live.
They reunite at a Marine urban training facility, a facility that resembles Khafji.
Yeah, this is not that far off, is it?
No. You know, the cinder block buildings and everything, it's a lot like the buildings we had over there. It's very similar.
You know, they almost had to have copied these off of those towns.
They might have.
And then it pretty much went out just like this. This is
a lot like it.
This is a lot like it. They actually, there was more room going that way coming out of the stairwell.
There were some concrete structures, about 8 of them, I think.
Yeah, like
that provided those ventilation shafts going down through the building.
Right. I'll never forget that sound of that metallic sound of Iraqi armor flooding down the street, and
we heard the whine of the turbine engines.
Then we knew this was going to be a little bit more than we expected.
I know what I thought at first was it sounded like a jet engine, and I thought that we were going to see a Marine Harrier jump jet coming down the city, and it just kept getting closer and closer, but it was coming slowly, and then the ground starts shaking.
Yeah.
And you start hearing the metallic clanks, you know, the treads on the pavement and everything. I was like, that's no jump jet.
I'll never forget looking over the side of that first building and seeing Iraqis going by, and they seemed like they had dark uniforms and dark hats, and to me they looked like Darth Vader's forces had just come into town. I thought, oh boy.
Blocks away from the Recon Marines' position, Army Specialists Melissa Coleman and David Lockett are on a routine assignment. They become lost and unknowingly drive their truck into the center of the Iraqi stronghold.
I wasn't at the town of Khafji intentionally. We kind of rolled into it on accident. The entrance to the city has these huge arches. that were white with green paint. And it reminded me of McDonald's arches. And as my coworker was driving in, we didn't know it had just been fought for that morning.
Corporal Brown and I saw it first, as it was 2 lost trucks.
And we got on the radio again, got to get these guys out of here.
I remember telling Chuck, you need to call this in because they're about to get waxed.
We had no radio communication. We're in Saudi Arabia in the desert. We were just like blind ducks.
They fired up that truck and...
They fired the truck up and the truck veered off to its right, our left, and we lost sight of it behind that building.
Right.
My coworker and I came under enemy fire. We just heard these gunshots ringing out, had no clue where they were coming from. And I had been hit. I had just a hole in my forearm with a pool of blood in it. During the capture, I had been sitting in the passenger seat. We headed into Khafji. The enemy fire came from this direction. And we tried to do a U-turn, but as we got here, they shot a hole in the steering box and we went straight into the wall. I was actually cowered down on the floor right there. Is pretty much where I'd gotten shot at.
A U.S. vehicle took a wrong turn, leaving 2 soldiers pinned down inside Khafji. A rescue operation was quickly mounted.
They weren't in the vehicle. The tires were spinning, deuce gear was in there, but they weren't in the vehicle. We don't know if they fled or were captured.
The rescuers were turned back by 2 Iraqi armored personnel carriers called BMPs. Cobra assault helicopters were called in. But the missing soldiers were nowhere to be found.
The staff sergeant that went up ran around the vehicle looking for them, hollering U.S. Marines, U.S. Marines. We got no response, and then we had to get out of there.
It's got to be disappointing not to be able to find those men.
Yeah, it's, we wanted to get them pretty bad.
Melissa Coleman, just 20 years old, is the first American female POW to be captured since World War II. She and Lockett face an arduous journey to the heart of Iraq. Doug Kleinsmith and the Marines at OP-7 evade capture. As their position is overrun, they drive south to a marsh area known as the Sabkas.
I just wanted to get as deep into the marshland as possible. But I didn't want to go all the way back to the Saudi lines because having been with those guys for the last 6 months, in the dark, they'll shoot first, ask questions later. Sure as I predicted, there was a Saudi force that came out of the line and they met us. And for a while there, it was like the Mexican standoff. I mean, they turned every gun toward us, ready to blow us away. So I threw some red smoke and I walked over to them. And when they saw me, one of the guys recognized me. "Oh, it's you, Captain Doug. We were about to shoot you." He says, "I know you guys were." He says, "You guys do that all the time." "Oh, you're too funny." And they took off and we took off.
POWs Melissa Coleman and David Lockett are transported to a prison compound in Baghdad. During their 3-day journey, they are interrogated. They are given food, but not allowed to sleep. Lockett is treated poorly by his captors. Coleman has not, as of yet, been touched.
The Iraqi soldier reached across me and tried to touch my chest. And I said no. And he tried again, and I said no. And he nudged me with the butt of the weapon on my leg. And, you know, I was adamant about it. In my mind, if he was going to touch me, he'd have to touch me dead. He was going to touch a corpse because I was not going to go out without dignity. And so I was fighting tooth and nail, you know, and I kept getting louder and louder. So finally his superiors in the front turned around and they talked back and forth in Iraqi. And so then he did it again. I'm like, okay, he doesn't understand English. David started to raise up and say something, and they hit him with the gun and pulled the pistol out and threatened to shoot him in the head. So he went to reach again, and I just reached across myself and punched him in the arm. You know, I'm just not going to sit there and say, yeah, here, have a field day. By that point, they had to thought I was just a lunatic.
Back in Khafji, the Saudis, with the help of U.S. forces, lead a counterattack to regain control of their city. The recon Marines call in artillery strikes against the Iraqi invaders. But every moment they stay on the rooftop increases their chance of detection.
We heard the armor coming towards the building. We peered out over the parapet that surrounded the rooftop and saw the tanks and armored personnel carriers moving into positions around our building. The Iraqis dismounted and they moved into our building because they realized that, just as we had realized, that building was the best vantage point in that entire part of the town.
The team had already instituted security measures in the stairwell just below their position. 2 small explosives known as Claymore mines and 2 Marines protect them from the Iraqis below.
We heard and saw their vehicles pull up all around. That's when we were first surrounded. And then they started heading up the stairwells, and I remember looking down the stairwell and seeing those helmets coming up, and they were talking.
Yeah. I remember Lance Corporal Sterling had a saw, Lance Corporal Bowling had the shotgun, and you or Chuck had put them on the stairwell, and those 2 Marines didn't move for 3 days. I guess one of them told us that they were coming in the building.
Yeah.
And I remember looking over the rail and seeing the helmets like you did, and looking at Sterling and saying, don't shoot or hit those claymores unless they look up.
Yeah.
And because we didn't want them to
if they would have rounded that corner on the 3rd floor to come up,
it would have been
that's when we would have hit the clackers, and we would have taken them out in the stairwell. But what are we going to do after that?
We would have been we would have been compromised.
The only thing that I remember thinking was more than likely this is going to end up in a fight, because I saw no reason why they wouldn't come up to the roof. And if they came up to the roof, we would have taken out the first group of them when we detonated the claymores, but after that it would have been a firefight. I suppose once or twice it crossed my mind that, okay, you're probably going to die here, but I just forced it out of my head and just continued to do the job.
The Iraqis stop short of the roof and never look up.
I've been wondering about this for years, why they never came up, and it just dawned on me that when they were coming up, they did see the claymores. But they didn't know enough about our weaponry to realize that these mines are command detonated. So probably in their minds, what they thought was the roof is booby-trapped. So they didn't go up there. A mechanized infantry platoon began staging their vehicles on the north side of our building, out in the street. And they put them there because it provided them excellent cover and concealment.
Iraqi troops actually got out of the vehicles and were standing on the sidewalk smoking cigarettes with their rifles over their shoulders and stuff. So we started calling it a mission.
Outside the city, a Marine artillery unit gets the call to direct fire on Iraqi troops below the recon team's position. Callahan and Brown are directly in the line of fire.
They said this is going to be danger close, which means the rounds are going to be hitting our position. Did we have cover? We told them, yes, we have cover. Shoot it now. So we only have a matter of seconds. It was like, 1,000 bolts of lightning hitting the roof.
The rounds that the artillerymen were firing for us were called DPICM, stands for Dual Purpose Individual Cluster Munition. And when it reaches a prescribed altitude above the target, the shell bursts apart, and it spreads out these softball-sized submunitions that spread out over a larger area than a single round could cover. And each one of those is capable of piercing the armor of an armored personnel carrier if it hits it on top where the armor is the thinnest. So you can do a lot of damage over a very wide area with just one shot. The second ones that hit, the outer edge of them was over our position, we heard a thunderclap above us, and I remember I looked up, and I see all these bomblets spreading out over us.
And those started exploding all around us, so 64 of those, and I don't know how many of the smaller munitions come out of this thing, but the explosions went on for, it seemed like a lifetime, that it just went on and on and on, and it was incredibly loud and violent.
So we start sprinting this way to get back inside the building, and I think you were behind me and Chuck was in front of me. And we got right about here, and then something, it felt like a baseball bat, hit me in the upper thigh, and I went end over end and landed on the concrete. I just remember the first thing that went through my mind was, no way, I can't believe it. I just got hit. This can't happen to me.
And the rounds were calling them in very close to our position. We knew that, but we also knew we had to take out those APCs.
Armored personnel carriers.
Armored personnel carriers. And basically, a round went off overhead, and I got hit in the leg.
I just remember seeing a lot of burned up vehicles and just rocks and building debris everywhere. I personally don't recall seeing any bodies because I don't know what happened to them. I mean, there was that much explosion that I'm not sure what happened to them.
In a Baghdad prison compound, Melissa Coleman is in solitary, but receives humane treatment from her guards.
I was treated differently than the men. I don't know if they were trying to prove to the Allies that they could treat women fairly. The men were burned with cigarettes. They were electrically shocked with batteries. They were almost starved to death.
Melissa is still in the path of danger. U.S. airstrikes drop bombs close to her prison.
One night, there was an air raid, and this was the only time that I feared for my life. And I said, Lord, you let me live through the Iraqis, now the Americans are going to kill me. We had an air raid, and they bombed the compound. And it had to have been within 2 miles of my prison. Because as I laid there, I could see this ball of fire coming from the sky. And it hit so hard, everything shook. And after every air raid, the Iraqi guards would stand outside my window and go, Melissa, are you okay? Melissa, are you okay? And one of my guards got a piece of shrapnel in his eye shooting Sam back at one of our airplanes.
Pilot Mike Edwards knows firsthand what it's like to face a SAM.
Most of the times when we're shot at, the temporal distortion kind of kicks in. You know, like people say, everything starts to slow down. The time I was shot, I just remember everything was just so crystal clear, and I saw this SAM come up at me, and it had the little corkscrew thing going, and I'm like, I can't believe someone's shooting at me. I don't believe this. And then all of a sudden you're going, how long have I been sitting here talking and thinking and looking at this thing coming up at me? And then your training kicks in. In reality, it's probably a fraction of a second, but it kind of wakes you up.
In Khafji, the recon Marines are in the middle of a firestorm. From the outskirts, American artillery pounds the city to hold back the Iraqis.
Right now, all we're doing, the only mission that we have currently is to continue to block further advancement.
But I mean, Marines in general, what are they going to do about the Iraqis being here?
Well, I expect we're going to go up and spank them. That's what we're going to do. And they probably ought to call 911 right now. I expect we'll go expel them rather violently, rather shortly.
Khafji is located in a sector of Saudi Arabia controlled by Saudi and Arab forces. So it is the Saudis, with limited help from U.S. air and ground forces, that have to retake the city.
This was a matter of need for the Saudis themselves, to give them a point of pride. This is their territory, and somebody has come in and taken one of their towns. They ought to be the ones to retake it.
On the third day of the battle, the Saudis make it into the city. The recon team is caught in the clash between Iraqi forces and the advancing Saudi units. As the fight rages around them, an Iraqi tank faces off against a Saudi armored vehicle.
The Saudis fired that tow missile and hit the tank. And the turret of the tank blew up and exploded into flames. And Corporal Brown and I were standing there watching the Iraqis jump out of these vehicles and start running. They were burning in flames, and a huge billow of black smoke started coming out and actually started covering the street and kind of covering our building.
That's when we realized, this is it. It's now or never. We go now. We got out on foot. We were running, and we headed out to the west, across the street, down a side street for a little ways. Then we turned south to head towards Saudi lines.
The town actually stops, the pavement stops, and the sand starts. We kept running into the desert, and one of our team leaders, Sergeant Imes, came speeding up in a stripped-down Humvee and said, "Get in," and we all dove in the back and took off into the desert.
As Saudi and Arab forces pushed further into the city, Doug Kleinsmith rejoins a Saudi brigade. They head north to cut off Iraqi reinforcements entering the city. Along the way, they encounter Iraqi soldiers who want to surrender.
There's about a dozen of them or so. And the closer they got, they realized, oh man, these are Americans, and not only that, they're Marines. Some of them knelt down, and you could see that they were just like, oh, my life's over. And one of the guys gets up, one of the Iraqis. He comes, as he's being searched, he's talking, he says to one of my corporals, he goes, please, kill me. Don't kill me. And he goes, no, we're not going to kill you. Go get back in line. So he gets back in line, he talks to his friends. Another guy jumps up, you're not going to kill me. You're not going to kill me. Says, no, we're not killing anybody. Get back in line. I had an interpreter tell me, he says, oh man, sir, you know what they told these guys? They told these guys that you get caught by an American Marine, he's going to cut off your arms and legs and leave you in the desert there. Now that was the propaganda on their side, and they believed it.
Now, with the Iraqis on the retreat, Kurt Lang and some of his team decide to go behind enemy lines to retrieve the equipment they had abandoned.
We're the Marines. You know, we don't leave anyone behind, and I didn't. And then after that, we don't leave anything behind. It was important, just maybe a personal save of face. You know, when you're put in a desperate situation where, you know, being overrun, you're undermanned, under-equipped, being overrun by a mechanized unit, you know, escaping with your lives. Well, now we had regained the initiative. Now it was time for me to go back and get everything. We came up with a plan to race back up to the observation post and do a quick search of our positions there. So there's very light resistance going up there. We got up to the sand dune, stopped the vehicle, back ramp goes down, and it was just, it couldn't have been more perfect. We recovered everything. Everything that had been missing a day or two ago was now back in our hands.
At the end of the war, Saddam Hussein releases 10 POWs as a show of good faith. Most were starved, beaten, and tortured. After 33 days of imprisonment, Melissa Coleman was about to be free.
They took us to a hotel. We got in the room and they had us, the 10 of us, sitting at a table for photo ops. All this media, they're all going, Melissa, how do you feel? Melissa, how did they treat you? Melissa, are you okay? Looking around at these people, who in the hell are these people? And why do they know my name? And I couldn't comprehend it. I was just so naive.
On March 10th, Melissa arrives at Andrews Air Force Base. Aboard Air Force One, on her journey home, Melissa celebrated her 21st birthday.
When things have come up, I've dealt with them on my own and moved on. It's not a part of my everyday life. I see my scars and it doesn't faze me. Kids ask me at my kids' school, you got shot and you didn't die? And yep, didn't die. You know, it's just nothing to me. It's life. We got letters from Bangladesh, from Tibet, from all over the world. One little girl even just drew a picture of a female soldier and said, United States. And it got to me.
Melissa and the men and women who fought and won the war in the Gulf were home.
That's all I remember is just how neat the green grass was. That it almost hurt your eyes. For 7.5 months, we hadn't really seen green grass. I was coming home, eating ice cream and going to movies and pizza and all that.
It was kind of sad to see the unit breaking up because we'd all become so close.
He's hands down one of the best guys I've ever served with. I can't imagine what Khafji would have been like without him. I can't imagine what the team would have been like without him. I bought him a Silver Star ribbon because that's what I thought Doc deserved. I think I said to him, you know, nobody else knows what we did up there, but we know what we did up there. So this is for you.
I realized that I meant something to them, and they meant something to me as well. So I put that ribbon on my desert cover and left it there until this day.
Well, there are no combat virgins in 3rd Platoon, Alpha Company, 3rd Recon anymore. Staying low.
If you go through a searing experience together, you come out the other end as brothers, maybe closer than your blood kin.
What I did was lead men in battle. And that is a privilege every Marine officer hopes to have. And there's no doubt in my mind that any one of them would have given their life for the others, and I would have the same for them. Man, if I would have said, charge the gates of hell, they would have been gone and would have done it.
There are a lot of heroes that no one's going to hear about. The odds, they're not just against you a little, they're against you a lot. When given an impossible task, who but a Marine?
I felt like I had asked those Marines to stay and do their job in Khafji, and they were young guys. So, you know, I asked them to stay, and they did a great job. And I'll never forget them.